Welcome back to the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. How should Michigan create jobs? For lawmakers, there are a few ways to do that. One is to increase taxes to create government jobs in education or healthcare or for park maintenance. Another is to give corporations subsidies and task them with hiring more people. Michigan has done both of these things, but the latter tactic often hasn't worked out.
That's right, Tia. According to a recent report from the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, which is a free market think tank, corporations that received subsidies to create jobs in Michigan only created 9% of the jobs they said they would. And that was from 2000 to 2020, so a 20-year period. That's only one for every 11 jobs were created. Sorry, only one for every 11 jobs were created. Metro producer Sam Corey sat down with James Hohman, Director of Fiscal Policy at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, to discuss why legislators give money to corporations to create jobs, even though they often don't come to be.
In Michigan, politicians are handing out a lot of subsidies to corporations. At least they've been doing that for the last 2 decades. We do this more than in other states. First, tell me, what is the economic theory about why this would be beneficial?
Oh, I love that you're asking that question, because economists have looked at selective subsidies for businesses for a very long time, and they remain skeptical that there's any good theory that we should take money from everyone in the hands of select companies. But there are a lot of good political theories about why this benefits lawmakers and administrators, and certainly the people who receive special treatment.
So essentially you're saying, like, politicians want to do this because it sounds good. It sounds good to say you're creating jobs even if you aren't. And also they support companies that then support their campaigns in the future. Is that right?
That's correct. But I will say that the big reason why there are political benefits is not because they can get campaign contributions, but because handing out subsidies shows their voters that they're doing something about jobs. It's in the news. There's a big story about it, and surely landing the next big factory or office is going to create jobs for the area and for their constituents. But when I looked at whether those companies that receive subsidies actually created the jobs that were announced, they have a 91% failure rate. Most of the jobs that are announced in newspapers don't happen.
Right. So I want to get into that. You wrote that the major deals Michigan lawmakers made from 2000 to 2020, of those deals, companies created just 9% of the jobs that were announced. That is, one job is created for every 11 jobs that are said would be created in these news stories. Why didn't this work out?
I think lawmakers have every incentive to inflate the numbers of what they expect, in part because when these deals are announced, they are incontrovertible, as in the companies are making pledges about a future that may or may not happen. And there's no one that's in a good situation to say, no, I don't really think you're going to create 1,200 jobs, General Electric, which was a front page story in 2009. I think you're going to create no jobs, or at least no jobs that are going to be permanent and lasting for the state of Michigan. So no one's in a good situation to call them out, so lawmakers have every incentive to inflate those numbers. The companies do. More jobs are better. It sounds better when your job deals create more jobs.
Wait, to be clear here, though, it's not just politicians. The companies are saying, listen, we're going to create this amount of jobs. This is what we're saying we're going to create.
That's correct. The companies are part of this as well. And maybe their projections are about rosy scenario, optimistic futures where everything goes well. But as we've seen from the experience from these deals, those rosy scenarios rarely pan out. In fact, I was only able to find a handful of examples of companies meeting or exceeding expectations.
Yeah, and we will get to those examples. But I do want to draw this out because I did think it was remarkable. You found that half the companies that said they would create jobs didn't create any. That includes GE and Ford. This is just a short summary. That includes GE and Ford in 2009, Northern Power Systems in 2010, the biorefinery Mascoma, I believe, in 2012, and Penske Logistics in 2017. What happened in all the spaces where the company said that they would create a bunch of jobs, 500, 1,000, 1,500, and they created none?
So a lot of those times, the companies attempt to create something, and it just doesn't work out. So when I looked at whether there are any jobs existing and being reported for these places today, they just don't exist. So the Penske Logistics Center, they lost a contract. The building that they made was to service that contract. They lost it, and so no one was working for Penske Logistics at that program or the project anymore. And it's the same thing with a lot of these other places. Sometimes they try to get capital to get customers, and it just doesn't work out. But a lot of these things they make an announcement and then nothing comes from it later. Who knows why? Never gets reported on.
What's the accountability for these companies that don't provide jobs or don't even get close to the number of jobs that they say they will provide?
It used to be that state assistance was contingent upon hiring people. That is, we made an announcement. We expect you to get a $12 million to collect $12 million from state taxpayers, but we're not going to pay out any of that money until you actually create jobs. So for a lot of the deals that I covered, the taxpayers were not out a dime. Not always, especially for the companies that created some jobs for a little while and then later were unable to keep it up. But deals these days don't have those terms. We pay companies, and companies get to collect hundreds of millions of dollars of subsidies through the state's SOAR program. They get to collect that money over the short term and before they create any jobs. And it's only the state that is going to have to look in the future if the companies fail to meet their expectations, which is a frequent occurrence, and they're going to have to ask for that money back or just decide that it's gone, which is something that happens when a lot of deals fall apart. There's a company that's struggling that doesn't have the money to pay back the state what it gave for job creation.
And it doesn't have to. Does it just not get the facility? Does it leave the state? I guess what often happens when it doesn't fill the jobs? Because they need people to work there, presumably. So
when these deals fall apart, often there's no customer, so they've got no one to sell to. And so it's not like they're going to move a facility that hardly opened to another state to service a customer who doesn't exist. These deals just fizzle out, and sometimes taxpayers are left paying some expenses for jobs that aren't there. Most of the time, they're not. Yeah. But it's rarely that those jobs that weren't created in Michigan are created elsewhere by the same company.
You're listening to The Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm producer Sam Corey, speaking with James Hohman. He's the Director of Fiscal Policy at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, a free market think tank. We're discussing why Michigan politicians have subsidized companies to create jobs in the state and why that mostly hasn't worked out over the last 2 decades. There was one company, James, that did deliver on the 1,000 jobs they offered, and they also were able to get pretty close on the amount of jobs that they said they would fill time and again, and that was Amazon. Do you know how they were able to do this? How they were able to fill exactly the amount of jobs they said they would almost each time?
Yes, I can tell you is that the program that they received is a program. It's called the Michigan Business Development Program, and it offers up to $10 million in assistance to select companies that apply for it. But the state doesn't ask for these beneficiaries to do anything that they otherwise wouldn't have done without state subsidies. So, and in fact, when you look at Amazon and Amazon locations around the state of Michigan, I believe there are 4 that received subsidies from the taxpayer, and they generally did what they expected or what they said that they would do. but we have 15 or more facilities, Amazon distribution centers, that were opened in the state of Michigan over this period that didn't get subsidies from the state taxpayer. So I got to question why taxpayers are involved in this when they can get the jobs without having to have extra taxpayer expense.
Yeah, they don't need it. So, okay, I mean, I see this and I'm reading the study and I get that, giving companies subsidies to create jobs is generally not worked. Another very popular idea that at least some economists discuss is tax breaks. Part of the reason, for example, that Tesla moved to Texas from California is for the tax breaks. What do you make of giving companies tax breaks to move and to operate in Michigan?
Well, Michigan does that too, and so this is part of the evolution of state selective business assistance. It used to be back in the 70s that tax breaks were all that the state of Michigan offered. That is, they offered select companies the privilege of not paying as much in property taxes and other business taxes as other businesses in the state. And what they did is they moved that, so they still do that. We still have a program offering industrial facilities tax abatements, commercial rehabilitation tax abatements to select companies that apply for it. But we also started giving refundable tax credits that far exceeded what companies owed in tax liabilities. So it's a sneaky way of handing businesses other people's money. And we started doing that, and we still do that to an extent, and lawmakers are talking about doing more of that. But what changed, something that happened in fairly recently, is that we just started writing companies $100 million or more checks. Michigan started doing that. Illinois started doing that. Virginia started doing that. This is a move in the wrong direction because this is a way to ensure that taxpayers have real expenses that cost a lot of money. This is money that could be better used on schools or roads or left in taxpayers' pockets. And instead we're taking money from everyone and just writing checks to these big companies. And that's on top of offering tax breaks and other assistance.
Yeah. There are a lot of Democrats and Republicans who are now very skeptical of subsidizing companies to create jobs. I hear this on both sides of the aisle now. But then there becomes a really important question of how to stimulate the economy. Now, I know a lot of Democrats, particularly progressives, will say we should be investing in public spaces, public transit, housing, public parks, and education. Just spend a lot in those spaces. But you work at a free market think tank. Instead of giving these public dollars to private companies, just spend a lot more on the public.
Infrastructure spending, even local parks and development, would be a much more effective use of money than taxing it from everyone to give to select companies. So what I like about this issue is, in general, people on the right and people on the left are skeptical of corporate welfare. And they are critical of corporate welfare for the same reason. They look at it as something that doesn't work, where the money could be spent elsewhere. And we disagree sometimes over what are the better alternatives, whether it's business climate or quality of life issues, or maybe they're the same thing and we're just looking at it differently. Mm-hmm. But I do think that people on both the right and the left would rather see our economic development strategy involve broad-based approach to attract and to retain businesses, to attract and to retain new residents, and that it would be better to look at those broad-based issues than trying to pick winners and losers through taxpayer subsidies.
Yeah, and you specifically said infrastructure. What do you mean by that? Is that where you said parks were okay, roads? What are we talking about? Housing? What are we talking about here?
If it's a matter of writing General Motors a check for $600 million for their next auto plant, or building a nice, $10-60 million parks in big cities across Michigan, I think the parks would be a better use of money. Or we could talk about other alternatives. We're getting close to the point where we're fixing roads faster than they fall apart. I think that's an important state duty. I think that does affect residences. It has economic effects, although it's somewhat tough to figure out exactly why, or what they're going to be. But that would be a better use of money than giving our largest companies huge taxpayer checks.
That was Metro producer Sam Corey speaking with James Hohman, Director of Fiscal Policy with the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, about why legislators often give money to corporations to create jobs that often don't come to be.
From the WDET newsroom, Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel is signing on to a lawsuit over new federal grant guidance from the Trump administration. Nessel says the administration can't legally change reimbursement rates without Congress approving it. Michigan teachers and administrators are sounding the alarm about President Trump's threats to shut down the U.S. Department of Education. State public schools get over $2 billion in federal funding each year through the department. State Representative Regina Weiss says, as a former teacher in the Detroit School District, she knows the importance of those federal dollars. So far, the Trump administration has attempted to shut down USAID and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, even though most legal experts believe that authority can only come from Congress. Several lawsuits have stopped many of the president's executive orders thus far.
Taking a look at sports, the Detroit Pistons are playing the Chicago Bulls tonight in Chi-Town. That tip-off is at 8. Dennis Schroeder was recently traded to the Pistons after spending time with the Brooklyn Nets and the Golden State Warriors this season, so he did a lot of moving around. As well, the Red Wings faced the Tampa Bay Lightning Saturday. They did lose 6-3. Coach Todd McLennan had a simple message for the Red Wings players: get away from the game, the arena, and go spend time with your family. Clearly, hockey is not on their brain right now. Head's not on the swivel. They're not keeping it together. I know. But coming up next, we are going to have a conversation about pedestrians and walking and the safety of walking as a pedestrian or biking as a pedestrian here in the city of Detroit. Talking to two of our interns here, we have Lauren Myers and Trevor McConicle. Now, both of you all have said that you don't own vehicles, but you do feel safe walking in the city of Detroit. Lauren, starting with you, you feel safe as a walker?
I feel safe walking in the city of Detroit all the time. It doesn't matter if I'm just walking to the store or anything. On campus, it's a little different because it's downtown in the heart of the city. Walking on campus, there's a lot of, we have our own police, basically, that are part of DPS. But when they drive on campus, like right next to your hips, it's kind of scary. Like you just walking and hear a motorized vehicle behind you. Yeah. That's Trevor. The only time I get scared.
Walking and biking is very nice around Metro Detroit. I feel very safe thanks to Project Greenlight, and there are very many cameras downtown Detroit and police. So, yeah, but there are a few times where we need stoplights and stop signs on the streets of Detroit.
Those are our associate producers, Lauren Myers and Trevor McConicle. Thank you both so much for giving us a little insight. And if you are afraid of getting into an accident when walking or biking around the city of Detroit, or even if you feel safe walking around the city of Detroit, give us a call, 313-577-1019. What do you do to stay safe on the roads?
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.